Have you ever smiled quietly while being insulted, knowing you held the key to that person's destruction? Sometimes, a loved one's silence cuts deeper than an enemy's blade. But perfect revenge is not screaming. It is letting absolute arrogance dig its own grave. Let me tell you about one evening in Aspen, where a cheap joke obliterated a career, and a so-called poster girl made 2,000 people hold their breath. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Lily Tucker. I am 35 years old, and for a very long time, I believed that silence was a virtue. I believed that if you kept your head down, did your work, and avoided unnecessary drama, the world would eventually recognize your worth. I was wrong. The world does not reward quiet competence. It rewards the loudest voice in the room, even if that voice is speaking absolute garbage. The air in Aspen, Colorado, on that particular December evening was thin, biting, and smelled faintly of expensive pine and unearned arrogance. My husband Liam and I were attending his family's annual winter anniversary dinner. The venue was an exclusive lodge that looked like a fortress of timber and glass, aggressively designed to keep the cold out and the elite in. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a heavy golden light over tables draped in blindingly white linen. The room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the clinking of heavy silver and the relentless hum of people casually mentioning their summer homes in Tuscany or their latest stock dividends. I was not born into this world. I work for Nexus Apex Dynamics, a company name that sounds intimidating enough to stop further questioning from polite society. I have always been fiercely private about my role there. When you operate in the shadows of corporate security and system architecture, you learn early on that over-explaining your job to people who do not understand it is a profound waste of breath. So I usually just smiled and said I worked in tech. Liam, sitting to my left, looked the part of the perfect supportive husband. He wore a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile polite and accommodating. But Liam hated conflict. He worshipped at the altar of keeping the peace, often at the expense of those he was supposed to protect. Sitting across from us was Bryce. At 29 years old, Bryce was married to Liam's younger sister and was the undisputed golden boy of the family. He was a startup founder, a title he wore like a royal crown. He possessed that specific brand of Silicon Valley arrogance, loud, overconfident, and completely convinced that he was the smartest person in any given room. Tonight, he was treating our dinner table like his personal stage. His intended audience was not his family, but the man seated at the head of the table, Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a billionaire venture capitalist, a man of quiet, intimidating wealth who rarely spoke but absorbed everything. Bryce was currently seeking millions in funding for his new cybersecurity startup, and he was practically vibrating with the effort to impress the older man. About halfway through the main course, Liam's aunt turned her attention to me. "So, Lily," she said, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness unique to old money. "What is it you actually do at Nexus Apex? It sounds so aggressively masculine." Before I could even open my mouth to offer my standard, polite deflection, Bryce leaned forward. He rested his elbows on the table, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, come on, Aunt Helen," Bryce interrupted, his voice carrying over the quiet jazz playing in the background. "Lily is just the poster girl for Nexus." The table went completely still. I felt the sudden shift in the air. Bryce chuckled, looking around the table to gather his audience. "You know how these massive, outdated tech conglomerates work now. They need to hit their diversity quotas. They need a pretty face for the annual reports to show they are progressive. They put someone like Lily on the payroll to look good in meetings while the actual engineers in the back room do the heavy lifting. Right, Lily?" He smiled at me, a smug, deeply insulting smile that challenged me to ruin the dinner party by defending myself. I did not look at Bryce. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head to look at my husband. This was the moment. This was the moment Liam was supposed to set his glass down, look at his brother-in-law, and say, "Do not ever speak to my wife that way again." It did not need to be a shout. It just needed to be a line drawn in the sand. Instead, Liam stared intensely at his half-empty glass of Cabernet. His jaw tightened, but his mouth remained firmly shut. He took a slow sip, his eyes glued to the white tablecloth. He was choosing the comfort of the family dynamic over my dignity. He was letting me be publicly humiliated because standing up for me would be too socially awkward. The betrayal of that silence was a physical weight in my chest. It pressed down on my lungs, cold and suffocating. "Is that so?" The voice did not come from me. It came from the head of the table. Mr. Sterling set his silver fork down. He did not look at Bryce. His sharp, calculating eyes locked directly onto mine. "Since you are just the poster girl," Sterling said, his tone entirely unreadable, "perhaps you could tell me your thoughts on the primary vulnerability of dual-core security protocols when handling decentralized nodes. My analysts are debating it." Bryce rolled his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh as if Sterling had just asked a toddler to solve calculus. "Sir, she wouldn't—" "Latency injection," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cut through the room like a razor. I kept my eyes locked on the billionaire. When the primary core verifies the handshake, the secondary core is blind for roughly 4 milliseconds. If a malicious actor floods the node during that micro-window, the protocol accepts the false packet as verified. The only way to patch it without tearing down the architecture is to stagger the cryptographic keys and force a secondary manual ping. But most developers are too lazy to write the extra lines of code. The silence that followed was entirely different from the one before. It was not awkward. It was stunned. Mr. Sterling held my gaze for a long moment. Then, very slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. He gave a single, respectful nod. "Exactly." Bryce's face flushed a dark, angry red. He scoffed loudly, waving a hand in the air. "She probably just memorized a company brochure," he muttered, aggressively cutting into his steak. "Nexus hands those talking points out to all their PR people." The conversation eventually shifted, masking the tension, but the damage was permanently done. Later that night, the car ride back to our hotel was agonizing. Outside the windows, thick snow fell into the darkness of the mountain roads. Inside the car, the heater blasted, but I had never felt colder. Liam gripped the steering wheel, staring blankly at the road ahead. He asked if I was tired. He asked if I thought the roads would freeze over. He talked about everything except the gaping wound sitting in the passenger seat next to him. I looked at his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights, and I felt nothing. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. I realized that if you allow people to define you as weak, they will eventually treat you as disposable. I did not argue with Liam that night. I did not cry. I simply stared out at the dark, snow-covered mountains, realizing that my marriage was already dead, and deciding exactly how I was going to dismantle the arrogant boy who thought I was nothing but a pretty face. If you want to know exactly how I tore his world apart, make sure you subscribe to Revenge Stories, because this was only the beginning. 3 weeks evaporated into a blur of glowing monitors and bitter black coffee. I buried myself in the subterranean architecture of Nexus Apex Dynamics, hunting anomalies in code while ignoring the glaring anomaly in my own home. Liam and I moved around each other like ghosts in our apartment, speaking only in logistical necessities. "Did you pay the electric bill? Are you eating dinner here?" The silence between us had solidified into a brick wall. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the internal messaging system on my encrypted terminal flashed red. A secure file transfer appeared from Riley. Riley was a senior threat analyst on my floor. a cynical woman who subsisted entirely on energy drinks and possessed an uncanny ability to find digital dirt on anyone. Her attached message was brief. "Look at slide 17. Your idiot brother-in-law is playing with fire." I opened the decrypted file. It was a leaked, nearly finalized pitch deck for the Silicon Peak Summit, the premier technology conference happening next month. Bryce was taking his startup to the main stage. The objective printed on the second page was bold and desperate: securing $30 million in Series B funding, directly targeting Mr. Sterling's venture capital firm. I scrolled through the first 16 slides. They were a masterclass in corporate buzzwords and empty promises: revolutionary architecture, disruptive paradigms, next-generation defensive matrices. It was all smoke and mirrors, designed to dazzle investors who did not actually understand the underlying math. Then I hit slide 17. My breath caught in my throat, freezing my lungs. The background of the slide was pitch black. In the center was a photograph. The subject's face was heavily blurred, but the posture, the tailored charcoal gray blazer, and the distinctive silver necklace resting against the collarbone were unmistakably mine. It was a candid photo taken of me at a tech symposium 2 years prior. Above my blurred image, bold white text screamed the headline: "When major corporations prioritize token hires over actual competence." Beneath it, bullet points detailed how legacy tech giants were wasting millions on poster girls to fulfill diversity quotas, leaving their security infrastructure vulnerable. Bryce was literally using my image, my existence, as the punchline to sell his supposed superiority. He was planning to project this onto a 50-foot screen in front of 2,000 industry leaders. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. Instead, a profound glacial stillness washed over me. When I walked through the front door of our apartment that evening, Liam was on the couch, watching a sports recap. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight into the living room, opened my tablet, pulled up slide 17, and dropped the device onto the glass coffee table right in front of him. "Explain this," I said. My voice was entirely flat. Liam blinked, pausing the television. He picked up the tablet, his brow furrowing as he read the screen. I watched his eyes track the malicious headline. I watched recognition dawn on his face as he identified the silver necklace, the blazer. I waited for the outrage. I waited for him to grab his phone and tear his sister's husband apart. Instead, Liam exhaled a long, heavy breath and rubbed his temples. "Look, you know how these tech summits are. It is just an aggressive marketing strategy. He is trying to create a disruptive narrative to secure his funding." I stared at him, genuinely wondering if the man sitting in front of me was a stranger wearing my husband's skin. A marketing strategy? He is using a picture of your wife to accuse my company of fraudulent hiring practices, labeling me a useless diversity hire in front of the entire industry. "The face is blurred," Liam countered, his voice taking on a pleading, whining edge. "Nobody outside the family is going to know it is you. Look, Bryce is under a massive amount of pressure right now. If he does not get this $30 million injection from Sterling, his startup goes under. Just let it go. Please, do not blow this out of proportion and cause a massive rift in the family right before the holidays." There it was, the final nail in the coffin. He was not just turning a blind eye to my humiliation. He was actively facilitating it to protect the family peace. He was asking me to lay down on the tracks so Bryce's train could keep rolling. In that exact second, the illusion of my marriage shattered entirely. I realized this was no longer just about teaching an arrogant boy a lesson in respect. This was an existential fight for my own identity. If I allowed the people closest to me to define my worth as zero, I would become exactly what they thought I was. I reached down and picked up my tablet. "You are right, Liam," I said, my voice shockingly gentle. "It is just a presentation. I will not cause a scene." His shoulders slumped in massive relief. "Thank you. I knew you would be reasonable." I turned and walked into my home office, quietly locking the heavy wooden door behind me. I sat down at my multi-monitor workstation and booted up my private servers. I was done being reasonable. I was done feeling hurt. I did not need to scream, and I did not need Liam's protection. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to start gathering data. Any sane person would have forwarded the presentation to the summit organizers and let their legal team handle the defamation. But sanity and satisfaction are rarely the same thing. I did not want Bryce to quietly disappear from the speaker list. I wanted to understand exactly what he was trying to sell. I pulled up the corporate beta testing registry. Through my top-tier clearance at Nexus Apex Dynamics, I had authorization to audit the external defense protocols of any firm seeking integration with our networks. Bryce's startup, eager for legitimacy, had submitted their software architecture for a preliminary compliance scan 2 months ago. They assumed it was a standard automated checklist. They did not realize a human architect could pull the raw logs. I began compiling the decrypted fragments of his so-called revolutionary defensive matrix. For 5 hours, I sifted through lines of syntax, looking for the genius he so loudly claimed to possess. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the realization hit me. It was not a spark of genius. It was a ghost. The underlying architecture was not new. It was a Frankenstein monster of open-source filler, clumsily stitched together to hide its true skeleton. But I recognized that skeleton immediately. It was a scrapped beta project from Nexus Apex Dynamics, abandoned 4 years ago because the primary logic gate was fundamentally unstable. Someone had stolen the discarded repository, changed the variable names, and slapped a new user interface on top of it. My eyes scanned the command strings, tracking a very specific, deeply buried logic loop. It was a signature. My signature. I had written that exact sequence of code when I was a junior developer. Bryce had not just stolen from my company, he had unknowingly stolen my discarded trash. But the theft was not the worst part. Because he did not understand the foundational mathematics of the code he had stolen, Bryce had blindly patched over the instability with a crude routing script. By doing so, he had created a catastrophic vulnerability. I ran a simulation of his planned live demonstration. According to his pitch deck, he intended to link his software directly to the conference hall's localized network to prove its real-time threat neutralization. The simulation results flashed red across my monitors. If he executed that software live, the patched routing script would immediately collapse under the network density. It would not just fail, it would aggressively invert. The program would blow open a massive, unencrypted backdoor into the local network. Every single device connected to the summit's wireless network, the secure tablets of venture capitalists, the encrypted phones of tech billionaires, the private laptops of government contractors, would be entirely exposed. He was about to unknowingly hand the keys to the kingdom to anyone listening on the port. The next morning, I sat in the glass-walled office of Marcus Thorne, the chief security officer of Nexus Apex Dynamics. I handed him the printed simulation logs. Marcus read through the 30 pages in absolute silence. When he finished, he dropped the thick stack of paper onto his desk. The veins in his neck were visible. "This is corporate espionage and gross negligence," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "He stole our intellectual property and mutated it into a digital hand grenade. I am calling legal. We are going to serve him with a cease and desist order before lunch, and we will sue his startup into the ground by Friday." "No," I said quietly. Marcus stared at me. "Excuse me? If you sue him now, his investors will just assume we are a monopolistic giant bullying a small startup. He plays the victim. He pivots. He survives." I leaned forward, resting my hands on his desk. "Let him go on stage. Let him run the live demonstration. But I need you to secure me a VIP all-access pass to the summit. I will handle the containment." Marcus studied my face for a long time. He had known me for 6 years. He knew I did not bluff. Finally, he nodded once. "Do not let him compromise the attendees, Lily. but burn his credibility to ash. The evening before the summit, the atmosphere in our apartment was suffocating. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, carefully running a lint roller over the lapels of a sharp-tailored navy blue suit. It was the armor I had chosen for the next day. Liam stood in the doorway, watching me with a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. "Do you really have to go to this thing?" Liam asked, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "You have been completely negative all week. If you are just going to sit in the audience and glare at Bryce while he tries to secure his funding, you should really just stay home. It is bad energy. The family needs this win." I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on my own reflection in the glass, adjusting the silver necklace at my throat. "Do not worry, Liam," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. "I am not going to be negative. I am just going to watch him perform." I smiled at the mirror. It was a cold, terrifying smile, but Liam could not see it. He only heard the compliance in my voice. He nodded, satisfied that he had managed his difficult wife, and walked away. I zipped my garment bag shut, ready for the morning. The grand auditorium of the Silicon Peak Summit was a cavernous theater of ambition, meticulously designed to hold over 2,000 of the most ruthless minds in the technology sector. The air conditioning was aggressively cold, carrying the faint, sterile scent of ozone and freshly printed lanyards. I sat precisely in the center of the 15th row, enveloped by a sea of dark suits, expensive watches, and glowing tablets. The ambient noise was a heavy, low-frequency hum of high-stakes networking and hushed negotiations. Down in the very first row, in a reserved VIP section, lined with velvet ropes, sat Mr. Sterling. His posture was rigid, his sharp eyes fixed entirely on the massive, unlit stage before him. A few rows behind him, completely oblivious to my presence, was my husband Liam. He was leaning forward, practically vibrating with secondhand excitement, ready to watch his family claim a $30 million prize. The lights in the auditorium suddenly dimmed, plunging the 2,000 attendees into absolute darkness. A booming bass note vibrated through the floorboards, and then a solitary, blinding white spotlight snapped on. Bryce strode out from the wings. He wore a crisp black turtleneck and tailored trousers, the universal uniform of the Silicon Valley visionary. A sleek headset microphone curved along his jawline. He looked entirely in his element, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence. For the next 20 minutes, he paced the stage like a predator, delivering a meticulously rehearsed monologue about the crumbling state of global cybersecurity. He used expansive hand gestures, pausing at the exact right moments for dramatic effect. He painted a terrifying picture of cyber warfare, and then, with the flourish of a magician, presented his own startup as the sole savior of the digital age. The crowd was captivated. I watched venture capitalists nodding along, their eyes reflecting the bright blue glow of the 50-foot LED screen behind him. But to understand the future, we must look at why the titans of the past are failing, Bryce announced, his voice echoing through the massive suspended speakers. He stopped dead center, turning his back to the audience, and raised his presentation clicker. He pressed the button. The massive screen flashed. A collective murmur rippled through the auditorium. There, magnified to 50 feet in height, was Slide 17. The background was pitch black. In the center, my blurred photograph loomed over the audience, the distinctive silver necklace gleaming at my throat. Above it, the massive white text read, "When major corporations prioritize token hires over actual competence." Bryce turned back to the crowd, a deeply condescending smile stretching across his face. "The old guard is distracted," he said smoothly. "They are wasting millions on optics, hiring pretty faces to sit in boardrooms and check diversity boxes, while their underlying infrastructure rots from the inside out." Down in the lower rows, I saw Liam nod slowly. He actually nodded. I did not wait for Bryce to finish his next rehearsed sentence. I placed my hands on the armrests of my chair and stood up, The auditorium was built on a steep incline, meaning my sudden movement in the middle of a dark sea of seated people was violently obvious. The man sitting next to me paused mid-keystroke. The woman behind me stopped whispering to her colleague. The ripple effect was instantaneous. One by one, heads turned. The rustling of fabric and the tapping of keyboards died away. Within 10 seconds, a suffocating, absolute silence fell over the room of 2,000 people. All eyes shifted from the giant screen to the woman standing perfectly still in the 15th row. Even the camera operators swung their heavy lenses toward me. Bryce stopped pacing. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he squinted past the harsh stage lights, trying to identify the disruption. I did not shout. I did not need to. In a room engineered for perfect acoustics, my voice carried clear, cold, and razor-sharp. Since we are discussing the rotting infrastructure of the old guard, I projected, my tone completely devoid of emotion, I have 3 questions regarding the revolutionary architecture you are about to demonstrate. Bryce froze. He recognized the voice. He recognized the navy blue suit. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost under the bright stage lights. First, I continued, pacing my words with lethal precision, when your primary logic gate encounters a decentralized node flood, how does your system prevent a cascading memory leak without isolating the affected subnet? A heavy shift occurred in the room. The venture capitalists stopped looking at me like an interruption and started looking at me like a threat. These were not the questions of a public relations representative. The software engineers scattered throughout the crowd began to sit up straighter, recognizing the deadly trap hidden in my words. Second, I said, taking one step out into the aisle, your documentation claims to use asymmetric decryption keys for real-time threat neutralization. However, if 2 conflicting packets hit your routing script simultaneously, what prevents the cryptographic handshake from defaulting to a manual ping, thereby exposing the entire port to a blind injection? Bryce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands, previously making sweeping, confident gestures, were now clutching the clicker so tightly his knuckles were white. And third, I concluded, the silence in the room now so dense it felt like a physical weight pressing against the walls. If your software fails to stagger those keys, what exactly happens to the local wireless network of the building it is currently connected to? Say, a building containing 2,000 highly sensitive devices belonging to the most powerful people in this industry? The atmosphere in the auditorium shattered. It went from stunned silence to a low, dangerous rumble. The executives in the crowd were not fools. They heard the specific terminology, and they understood the catastrophic implications of what I was asking. They began checking their own devices, sudden paranoia infecting the front rows. Bryce was completely paralyzed. He brought a trembling hand up to his headset microphone. "Listen, everyone," Bryce stammered, a high-pitched, nervous edge completely ruining his previously smooth voice. "This is a stunt. This woman is a disgruntled family member. She has a personal grudge against me and is just throwing out buzzwords to disrupt the presentation." He let out a breathless, desperate laugh, looking toward the VIP section, specifically at Liam, for validation. "She is literally the poster girl I was just talking about. Security, can we please have this woman escorted out immediately?" 2 heavily built security guards in dark suits had already started moving down the carpeted aisle toward me, their hands reaching for the earpieces curled around their ears. Bryce stood on the stage, visibly breathing hard, his chest heaving under the black turtleneck. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction, silently urging the guards to hurry. Down in the VIP section, right in the center of the first row, a single hand went up into the air. It was not a rapid or aggressive motion. It was a slow, deliberate raising of a palm. The effect was absolute. The 2 security guards froze in their tracks, looking down at the front row. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Sterling did not stand up. He did not turn around to look at me. He simply kept his hand raised for 2 agonizingly long seconds, commanding the attention of the entire room before lowering it. Then, he leaned forward, pressing the button on the small microphone stationed at his VIP seat. The lady asked 3 highly specific technical questions. Sterling's voice boomed through the speakers. It was calm, raspy, and carried the weight of a man who controlled billions of dollars. "We are all investors here, Bryce. We value transparency. I, for one, would very much like to hear the answers regarding the cascading memory leak and the vulnerability of this building's network." Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. "Answer her." The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. It was the sound of 2,000 predators smelling blood in the water. I remained standing in the aisle, my arms resting loosely at my sides, watching the man on stage unravel. Bryce opened his mouth, but his throat had gone completely dry. He swallowed hard. The harsh, unforgiving glare of the stage lights illuminated the sudden sheen of sweat breaking out across his forehead. He looked desperately at his clicker, as if the plastic remote could somehow offer him the architectural knowledge he did not possess. "Sir, Bryce stammered, the microphone picking up the nervous click of his tongue. "The node flood protocol is handled by a proprietary firewall. We have a robust perimeter defense that, well, it negates the need for a secondary manual ping. The system is designed to handle immense bandwidth. It is revolutionary." He was drowning in buzzwords. The software engineers in the room began muttering to one another. The venture capitalists, who usually bought into confidence, could smell the fear radiating from the stage. Bryce was not explaining his software. He was desperately trying to guess how it worked. "That is a public relations answer," I said, my voice cutting through his panicked rambling. A staff member, sensing the explosive nature of the confrontation, had nervously jogged over and handed me a roving microphone. I did not ask for a marketing pitch. I asked for the specific logic gate pathway. Bryce took a step backward, physically retreating from the weight of the room. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are trying to ruin my life because you are jealous." "I am not jealous," I replied softly into the microphone. "I am bored." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim lighting of the auditorium. "Let us bypass the theoretical debate," I announced, my voice echoing over the hushed crowd. "Let us look at a live demonstration." Bryce's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Turn off her microphone. Someone cut her audio right now." No one moved. The audio technicians in the back booth were just as captivated as the billionaires in the front row. I looked down at my phone. I opened a basic command terminal application. There were no complex hacking algorithms. There was no intense race against a firewall. Because you do not need to pick a lock when you are the person who forged the key. I typed exactly 6 characters. I pressed enter. For 1 heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a massive, agonizing screech of digital feedback tore through the auditorium speakers, forcing people to cover their ears. Behind Bryce, the 50-foot LED screen displaying my blurred photograph violently flickered. The image shattered into a mosaic of digital static. A split second later, the entire screen flashed a blinding, aggressive red. Giant, bold white letters burned across the display. Fatal exception. Root access granted. System compromised. Chaos erupted. 2,000 people began talking over each other in a crescendo of panic and confusion. Executives grabbed their briefcases, checking their devices to see if their own networks had been breached. The illusion of security was entirely shattered. On stage, Bryce completely lost his mind. He spun around, staring at the blood-red screen in horror. "Security! Cut the network!" Bryce screamed into his headset, his voice cracking hysterically. "We are under a cyber attack. The system is being hacked. Shut down the local network immediately. This woman is a cyber criminal. Arrest her." He was hyperventilating, pointing frantically at me, trying to play the victim of a malicious digital assault. He was playing his final card, hoping to buy sympathy by framing himself as the target of corporate sabotage. I stood perfectly still in the aisle. The roving microphone was still gripped firmly in my hand. I let him scream. I let him thrash in the trap. I waited until the sheer volume of his panic began to die down, until the auditorium realized that the red screen was not spreading, but holding steady. I raised the microphone to my lips. "There is no hacker, Bryce," I said. My voice was chillingly calm, washing over the frantic crowd and freezing the room back into silence. I took one slow, deliberate step down the carpeted stairs toward the stage. "We are not under a cyber attack," I continued, holding his terrified gaze. "I did not use a brute force algorithm. I did not bypass your perimeter defense. I just used the system's root admin key, a master password comprised of 6 simple characters." I stopped at the edge of the first row, right next to Mr. Sterling, who was watching me with an expression of intense fascination. I looked up at Bryce, who was now trembling uncontrollably, the microphone headset slipping down his sweaty cheek. "I used the exact line of master code that I personally wrote 4 years ago," I declared, my voice ringing with finality. "Long before you dug it out of a discarded project file, slapped a new interface on it, and tried to sell my garbage as your genius." The auditorium exploded. The whispers turned into outright gasps. The wealthy investors in the front rows turned to look at Bryce with absolute disgust. The golden boy of the tech world was dead. The man standing on the stage was nothing but a fraud, exposed in front of every single person he had ever hoped to impress. Bryce's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse under the harsh white spotlight. His knees buckled slightly. The $30 million dream was gone, replaced by the crushing reality of total, undeniable annihilation. The blinding red glare of the compromised system washed over the front rows, painting the faces of the investors in the color of total failure. Bryce was gasping for air, clutching his useless presentation remote as if it were a life preserver. Before the chaos could escalate into a complete frenzy, the scraping of a heavy leather chair echoed loudly from the VIP section. Mr. Sterling stood up. He did not look at the frantic boy on the stage. He turned around, facing the sea of panicked executives. He raised his hands, a simple gesture that commanded absolute obedience. The murmurs and shouts died down instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling projected, his raspy voice carrying a terrifying calm, "please remain in your seats. There is no active security threat to your devices. The vulnerability has been contained." Sterling then turned his gaze toward me, standing quietly in the aisle. He gestured toward me with open respect. "Allow me to formally introduce the woman who just saved this entire summit from a catastrophic network breach," Sterling announced, making sure every syllable reached the back of the massive hall. "She is not a public relations representative. Her name is Lily Tucker. She is the head of zero-day architecture at Nexus Apex Dynamics, and she is arguably the most lethal cybersecurity architect in this hemisphere." A collective wave of realizations swept through the crowd. The heavy hitters in the room understood exactly what that title meant. It meant I was the apex predator in their digital ecosystem. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, his voice hardening as he finally addressed the stage, "when Bryce submitted his proposal to my firm last month, asking for a $30 million injection, I required a blind, independent audit of his code. I hired an external specialist to conduct it." Sterling crossed his arms, his eyes filled with unadulterated disdain. "Lily submitted her final report to my office 48 hours ago. She failed your project, Bryce. She explicitly warned me that your architecture was fundamentally broken, highly unstable, and entirely derivative. I allowed you to take this stage today for one reason only. I wanted to see if you had the integrity to disclose the vulnerabilities yourself. Instead, you attempted to sell us stolen property while publicly insulting the very woman who wrote the code you could not even understand." Bryce dropped the clicker. It hit the hardwood stage and shattered. His knees finally gave out, and he collapsed into a crouch, burying his face in his hands. He was entirely, irrevocably finished. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted 3 rows behind me. "How dare you!" a man shouted. Liam aggressively shoved his way past 2 venture capitalists, marching down the aisle toward the stage. His face was flushed red with manufactured outrage. He pointed a trembling, angry finger at his brother-in-law. "How dare you steal from my wife, Bryce?" Liam yelled, puffing his chest out, making absolutely sure the entire room could hear his sudden burst of morality. "You disrespected her. You stole her hard work, and you lied to our family. I will not stand here and let you humiliate my wife like this. You are an absolute disgrace to this family." Liam turned to me, offering a dramatic protective hand. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, desperately trying to play the valiant defender. He wanted to rewrite the narrative. He wanted the 2,000 people in the room to see a loyal husband rushing to protect his brilliant wife from the villain. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the tailored suit, the perfectly styled hair, and the utter emptiness behind his eyes. I felt no anger. I felt absolutely nothing at all. I did not take his hand. Instead, I brought the microphone back up to my lips. "Sit down, Liam," I commanded. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth, slicing right through his pathetic theatrical display. Liam froze, his hand still hovering in the empty air between us. "Lily, what are you doing?" "I am defending you. I am on your side." "You do not need to stand up and protect me when the game is already over," I replied. The acoustics of the room carried my cold dismissal to every single corner of the auditorium, stripping away his pride piece by piece. "Your bravery is exactly 3 weeks too late. You chose your side when you told me to stay quiet, be reasonable, and let him use my face as a punchline to keep the family peace. Do not try to play the hero now just because you finally realize who won the war." Liam's mouth opened and closed silently. He slowly looked around at the thousands of faces staring back at him. They were not looking at a hero. They were looking at a coward. He slowly lowered his hand, his shoulders slumping forward, completely emasculated and humiliated in front of the most powerful people in the country. I handed the microphone to the nearest stunned staff member. I turned my back on the stage, turned my back on my husband, and walked up the aisle, out of the auditorium doors. The summit ended for Bryce in that exact moment. The investment fund was immediately withdrawn by Sterling's firm. The news of his intellectual property theft spread through the tech sector like wildfire before the afternoon networking sessions even began. His startup was dead by sunset. That evening, I did not return to our shared apartment. I stood alone on the expansive balcony of a luxury suite in a downtown hotel. I held a glass of expensive bourbon in my hand, feeling the biting winter wind against my face as I looked out at the massive snow-capped mountains glowing under the moonlight. My bags were already packed and sitting by the door. The divorce papers would be drafted and served by my attorney first thing in the morning. I took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the heat burn pleasantly down my throat. I breathed in the crisp, freezing air, and for the first time in years, my chest felt completely light. I had learned a permanent, undeniable lesson. Your value is not dictated by how small-minded, arrogant people perceive you. Your value is determined solely by whether you have the absolute courage to level their entire world when they dare to cross your boundaries. Inside the quiet suite, my corporate phone began to ring. I turned around, a genuine, unburdened smile finally touching my lips. I set the crystal glass down on the balcony table and walked inside to answer the call, stepping cleanly out of the shadows and into the next chapter of my life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.